What's happening, hardscapers? This is episode 326 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And on today's episode, we have returning guest George Urvari from Knowledge Tree Consulting, Oriole Landscaping as well. And actually this past week, they just did an event with Quavik in Milton, and it was awesome. We had been talking about this event leading up to it on the podcast. If you missed it, you missed out, because the Quavik's facility is amazing. I did put out some stories on what they were showing us in the different stations that they had us visiting throughout the day, and then afterwards there were some talks that both George and Peter from Oriole Landscaping gave, as well as George from Quavik gave as well. Just wanted to give a huge congratulations to the Knowledge Tree Consulting team, as well as George Coito from Quavik, who opened his doors, and they all put on an excellent show. And thank you to them for putting that on for us and all who attended that. But in today's episode, we cover a large range of topics, and especially a challenge that George has for you, the listener. If you are interested, wait till the end, where he gives this challenge to 3 hardscape landscape companies if you're willing to take him up on his offer. It's an interesting one, so be sure to tune in to the very end of the interview for that challenge. But throughout the interview, we get into the difference between consulting, coaching, and advice, how George categorizes companies that he consults, what he looks for first when he analyzes a company, and how important it is to understand the numbers of a business and whether or not you can make decisions without those numbers, the importance of operations, leadership in a company, the people in the company, and when you should grow versus optimize in your business. But before we get into today's episode, we want to say thank you to our sponsors. Cycle CPA. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. Patio SEO has hopped on board as a sponsor, and they are a leading marketing and brand building company in the hardscape industry. And if you don't know, this company is run by James Reed. We've had him on the podcast a couple of times, some of our more popular episodes, and he owns hardscape businesses across the country. And now you can have access to the same in-house marketing team that he has access to at patioseo.com. So if you're looking for a killer website, targeted ads, or data-driven strategies to grow, check them out at patioseo.com. If you're planning to go to Hardscape North America in Louisville, Kentucky, October 22nd to the 24th, you can use promo code VIPHTH to sign up, get 50% off your registration. That also gives us a little bit of a kickback and helps us here at the How to Hardscape podcast. And Knowledge Tree Consulting. George and Peter there are efficiency consultants in our industry, and I've had the privilege of having them both on one episode of the How to Hardscape podcast, and George multiple other times. Always great episodes, and I also got to sit down on a one-on-one with George and went through what they do for businesses, and I left that meeting with a lot of value, so I can't recommend them enough. If you want to learn more about what they do, go to knowledgetreeconsulting.com and get that conversation started with them today. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Today we're joined by many returning guests here. George Urvari, him and his partner Peter are completely hands off of Oriole Landscaping now in Toronto, and for 5 years, or probably a little bit more since we last spoke, has done consulting with Knowledge Tree Consulting. You've heard me talk about them on the podcast many a times. I've gone to their last event. It was really well done, and now they've got an event coming up August 19th and 20th, and that's going to be at Quavik Contracting, who you heard on our previous episode, George there. And with that kind of long intro, George, thanks again for joining us back on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's always great to be on your podcast, and you're a great host.
We've talked a lot about various topics. One of my favorite ones, profit last, and why that would be the case. We our last episode was on equipment, always a popular topic there. Today we're going to be talking about consulting, coaching, and advice, the distinguishing factors between those few, as well as a bunch of other questions that we're also going to get into. And George also has a challenge at the end of this podcast to perhaps three business owners out there listening to this. If you want to learn more about that challenge and perhaps get some consulting from George and the team at Knowledge Tree Consulting, tune in to the very end of this episode for that challenge to anyone interested in taking it on. George, do you want to add anything to that before we get started here, or do you want to keep it as vague as that?
Yeah, we'll keep it vague. I want to test to see how brave people are with no risk.
Absolutely. That's a good way to tease that. So, George, let's get started here. First off, how long have you been consulting? Is it that past 5 years or so that I was sort of going off that? And how many companies actually have you helped in that time?
So we're at over 100 companies now, and I formally formalized my consulting business, I guess, well, 5 years ago, and then I took my old holding company, created a new holding company to rename the company, and it was a bunch of reasons, legal reasons also, because I do a lot of work in the U.S. I had to get a bunch of things aligned and cleaned up and separated. And before that, I'd been probably consulting for 10 years before that, informally through Oriole Landscaping, just not quote, quote, under the name of a consulting company.
And then with those over 100 companies, what are the revenues that these companies are typically doing in when they reach out for some sort of consultation?
Yeah, so I have a couple of startups, and they're awesome because they have no baggage and no mistakes, and which means we can set up everything right the first time, and they don't have to fix anything. And even to the point of they actually don't even know how to build stuff. So I will oftentimes uh, give advice on how to build things, how to build a retaining wall, how to build a stone wall, how to mix the cement, what ratio of cement, types of cement to build things, drainage issues, all kinds of stuff where you can get in big trouble. And so for the startups, that's huge because they not only don't know business, they actually don't even know their trade necessarily. So yeah, I've got three or four startups, and then I've got companies that are 20 million plus. So there's a whole spectrum, lots of two, three, $4 million companies, lots of $1 million companies. Yeah, and it's this business is the same, and it's really a function of how much do you know about business? So I call it general business knowledge. So we created an education system. If I was going to teach business, I would start with general business knowledge first. Then I would talk about leadership. Then I would get into continual improvement. Then I would get into finance, technology, human resources, operations, and sales and marketing, literally in that order. And last but not least, growth. That's my last category. And so my approach is always the same. You're only allowed to grow if you get your things dialed in because you're going to blow up if you don't.
George, I can see a company coming to you who's doing like a million plus and being like, we are way out of our depth and we want to grow, but we need a consultant in. But what about those like startups? What kind of common theme are you seeing with those few companies that you've helped that are in the startup phase, especially for like the actual person at the helm, the owner, that they're actually willing to spend the money on a consultant? I would see that being a very difficult bullet to bite when you're first starting out, but extremely helpful in that startup phase to just immediately have somebody that helps out.
The first thing that we would do is we would make sure that their chart of accounts for their financials is set up beautifully. Step one. Otherwise, you're going to be redoing that. So I'm working with a company right now that does about 13 or $14 million in revenue. It's a bit more complicated because they have POS systems and integrations, but they've probably spent a few $100,000, more than that, two or $300,000 on resetting their chart of accounts.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if you did that right the first place, none of that would have to happen. And so that's the first thing that I would do. Then I would figure out what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. I would get my HR recruiting down tight. So I've done this with a number of companies. And I would set up a standard operating system for them so that every file and everything could go in the right place. And if you had that back end, so think of your business as a game, and you have defense, you have a goalie, and you have offense. So if you have a great defense, it's not nearly as hard to win. And if you have a great offense and a great defense, then it's really easy to win. So most people think they're going to have the offense and they're going to build the defense and then they lose the game. And so you can lose a lot faster than you can win. So the back end, people buy franchises for a reason. The reason is that the back end is all there and all they got to do is operate the business. They don't actually have to create systems. They don't have to do the administration. So unfortunately, you still have to do the administration, but at least you don't have to build the systems. And so it's a huge head start if you get that stuff out of the way. You're gonna have to spend the money anyway, or you're gonna suffer the mistakes and the grief of having to do stuff twice or doing it wrong or not paying your taxes on time or all those things that you see typically in small businesses.
So with those startups, those owners, is there any like common personality trait that you see with them, or do they just know, like, have they owned a business in the past and they know coming into perhaps a new industry that they need to have somebody to help them through that startup phase, or is it just like a common personality trait that they're go-getters and they want to do this right from the very beginning? Because that's really interesting to me. Is there any common sort of personality traits between them? Have they already owned a business in the past, or what is it about
Yeah.
them?
So a few of them they've gone to university and had financial education.
Okay.
And even still, they're hiring me for financial education.
Yeah.
And so I would say they have wisdom at an early age.
Gotcha.
And so, you pay for bobcats, you pay for materials, and you don't pay for expertise, which is kind of insane. So they understand the value of intellectual capital. So that's the biggest difference. And they're not afraid to, for like typically for a business, if you spend $10,000 to get help, it would probably save you 20 or 30 the first year. Right. But it's intangible, so people can't get their head around it, so they don't do it.
I always say in our intros that you yourself and Peter are completely or hands off of Oriole Landscaping. Do you guys still do anything for Oriole Landscaping? Do you still operate in any capacity or any roles and responsibilities in the business there?
The only thing I do for Oriole is if I learn a best practice, I'll bring it back and implement it in the company. That's it. And actually, before I left Oriole, I gave myself a title of Chief Improvement Officer. And so I didn't deal with customers. I didn't do anything. I only worked on process. We already had great people. So the only thing I could work on was making better processes. And I dialed in, for 5 years, I would say, process, process, process. And it made a huge difference in the performance of our people and the lack of frustration dealing with crappy processes.
So let's get into this. What is the difference between consulting, coaching, and advice? And going off of that advice, how do we know if the advice is actually sound advice, good advice to use? So initially, consulting, coaching, advice, what are the differences?
Great question. So one of the things that we did is we realized we hired a sales consultant as well. So how do I become a better salesperson? We realized we were dropping the ball on sales. So like people are going to spend ten or $15,000 on consulting, and they're afraid. Like, is this going to work? I don't know. And so what we did is we sort of offer 1 hour at no charge, and then we have a $500 3 hour session. So we're trying to build trust, right? And then we can show you what the path looks like. And then if you see the need, then you'll commit. If you don't have the funds, believe me, the funds are in your business. There's a lot of waste you get rid of. And so we're going to build some trust. So consulting is essentially intense. And so it's my favorite way of doing things. You get way more done. It's in person. Either I fly out to see the people or they come to see me. And in 3 days, ideally, you bring a team together, they learn together, and you actually blow through stuff and actually create and oftentimes implement solutions in real time. So that's consulting. And then what you would do is you would finish a project or have another project and go and knock it out in 2 or 3 days. So it's done. Whereas coaching, you're drip feeding, once a month, once a month, once a month. You're improving, but the speed is glacial. And And you also can lose momentum, and you can leave people behind because one person couldn't make this meeting, couldn't make that meeting. So the consulting is based on a concept called flow efficiency. So those of you that are interested in efficiency, look up flow efficiency versus resource efficiency. And flow efficiency blows the doors off of resource efficiency. Resource efficiency is great to make money as a business model. For me, if I had a coaching system, however, flow efficiency is far better for the customer. The difference is that with flow efficiency, you might have to pay $15,000 one shot, whereas with resource efficiency, you're spreading out the cost over time. You're also getting the benefit over time. And then the time delay between that session is sometimes lost, and you have to circle back and do it again. So the other thing also too is in 3 days, I can find out exactly what's wrong. And sometimes you tell me you're thinking of doing this, and I'm like, don't do that, do this instead. So it's kind of like once we dig under the covers a bit, we get to see what's really going on, and then we can give some better advice. So I find that the advice, which is the third piece, is far better when you get to spend 3 days with a team and hear from everybody what's good, what's bad, what's ugly. You can get to look at the financials. If it's operations, you can look at the operations either through photographs or in person, and then you can prescribe all kinds of solutions. So most companies that I do, one of the last companies I did, I found $70,000 of money tied up doing nothing. Hey, well, you can pay some debts off. You can go on a holiday. You can do like what that's doing nothing for you. Like, why don't we free up that money and do something with it? Or let's double down on some new process or some new software, whatever it is that you need to do. So, yeah, so coaching takes forever and it's useful. Consulting is deep and dirty and it's like exhausting and heavy. And then there's advice that you get along the way. So we have like what's called our 911 advisory. And so if you have an issue, you can just email or call us. And typically within 24 hours, you're going to get a response. What should I do here? This is whatever's happening, an HR problem. I got a person that's not paying me, whatever. Like, what should I say? What should I do? So obviously AI is becoming a lot more useful at answering some simple questions and some of the things the AI can't answer.
What do you do in a situation where a business owner is dead set on something, but you know it's not the right decision either at that time or for that business? But that owner just wants to maybe scratch an itch, or it's something that they've always wanted. I don't have a great example of this, but maybe like a business owner wants to buy a dump truck, but you know it's not the right time. Do you try to convince them not to, or maybe add another service and it's just not the right time?
Yeah, so we have all kinds of assessment tools that we use to get them to get to the right conclusion.
Got it.
So I try to use empirical data to tell you to do this or that. And plus, we'll test scenarios, pros, cons, unintended consequences. Plus, in a team environment, you're way less likely to be stuck on your dumb idea because the rest of the team's going, hey, fire, red alert, bad idea. Are we ready for this? So we have tests like, so for example, you want to grow the business. You'll go through a growth test and it'll ask you, is this in place? Is this in place? Is this in place? And it's all like color coded. So it's like, if it's yes, it's green. If it's no, it's red. And it'll give you a score. It'll actually tell you, do not grow at this point. Jenny's going to quit because she's already maxed out. Congratulations that you can sell more work, but your admin can't keep up and you won't collect the money and she's going to quit and then you're going to have a bigger problem. And so you got to be lined up, ready to go before you do stuff like that. And I've seen really intelligent people do really dumb things. So like there's stupid smart and then there's smart stupid. And it's quite interesting to see the difference. The common theme definitely is the leadership mindset. The best companies have great leaders and they're coachable, and that's a big deal.
So, how do you know that the advice is sound, or how would a business owner know that? Is that based off that just empirical data that you're able to just go through and see and make an informed decision, or how would, especially in this day and age where advice is everywhere and you can find advice from anyone and everyone, how do you know if it's sound advice?
So everything is done through the prism of risk, layered with uncertainty. So, what's certain, what's not, that's a problem. Uncertainty is terrible. And then you can quantify your risk. So if you can quantify the risk, the worst thing that happens is you lose a bit of money or a bit of time. And so the first question is, will this put you out of business? And if the answer is no, you can try it. Then the next question is, if I did this, do I have the capacity to do it? Or am I just going to try and wing it? And I'm not a winger. So we're going to have a process and we're going to follow it. And also, if we do go down a path and it turns out it's a bad idea, we're going to reverse course. So the thing called the sunken cost fallacy, and I see, well, I've already paid for it, therefore it's a piece of crap. Like you wouldn't keep a crappy employee. It's the same thing with a decision. It was a bad decision, reverse course. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm working with a company, and they were in growth mode, and they opened this new location, and it added. Well, I don't even think it added. So they did an extra $1 million in revenue or something like this, right? I'm like, well, if you didn't have that location, would the other locations still have gotten the revenue? And it turns out they would have gotten 80% of the revenue. So for 20% extra, and I did the math, so I love doing math, it was a mistake. So they shut it down. Done. And it cost them, they spent $100,000 to set up this location, plus the time. And it was a complete mistake. Now, I hadn't dealt with them before they made that decision. I did make them reverse that decision. So sometimes a good decision is ending a bad decision.
We want to take a break from today's episode to talk about marketing. Are you looking to take your hardscape business to the next level? Well, this is brought to you by Patio SEO, the leading marketing and brand building company in the hardscape industry. And if you don't know, this company is run by James Reed, who owns multiple hardscape businesses across the country. And here's the kicker. You're not just getting access to any team. You're getting access to the very team that helped grow James's own companies, plus hundreds of others in the industry. Whether you need a killer website, targeted ads, or data-driven strategies to grow, Patio SEO has got you covered. They've been in your shoes and know exactly what works. We've had James Reed on the podcast a couple of times, and they're some of our more popular episodes, talking about branding, talking about how he's built companies across the country. And with that, he needs lots of leads, which means he's had to perfect his branding and marketing. And now you can have access to that same in-house team that he has access to for his own hardscape company. So if you're ready to build your brand and see some serious growth, check them out at patioseo.com. That's patioseo.com, or follow James on Instagram at road to 100ms. That's road to 100ms. Let's get your business the attention it deserves. Now back to the episode. We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Cycle CPA. It's crucial to review your financial statements on a monthly basis so you can diagnose areas for improving your business's financial health early before they become significant issues. Too many contractors wait until the end of the year to review their financials as they file taxes, when it's often too late to take action to change the outcome. Cycle CPA not only handles bookkeeping and taxes, but they also ensure that you're armed with financial data on a monthly basis to make key business decisions. They offer benchmarking, cash flow forecasting, and assistance in developing targets for financial metrics. With their team of accountants specialized in the hardscape and landscape industry, they currently work with hundreds of companies in this field. Visit cyclecpa.com, and for $200 off, mention the How to Hardscape podcast. Now back to our episode. How do you categorize, or how would you categorize companies that you consult with?
There's what I call distress companies, so they're in trouble. It could be financial, it could be emotional, it could be a whole bunch of things. Could be, there's mutiny about to happen. So, you might be making money, but everyone's going to quit. That's a distress situation. Or, business is coming in like crazy, but you can't collect the money. That's a problem. So then there's companies that are like opportunity companies. So everything's pretty good. It's not great. And man, it could be way better. So I call those opportunity companies. Those are way more fun to work with. And taking a distressed company to an opportunity company is an absolute dream. And then you have companies that are somewhere between distress and opportunity. And so they don't know what to do. And so typically where most companies fail is when they start adding hats to the business. So their overhead starts to grow. That's when the wheels fall off. for a couple of reasons. A, their costs are their expenses. I don't use the word cost nowhere. I use the word expense. So their expenses are going up. They're not generating money revenue to offset that expense, but they need it. Okay. And so that's a problem. And then the other problem is they hire somebody in that overhead position and the person sucks. So now that sales slash estimator is dropping the ball, not getting back to the customers on time. The estimates are flawed, and you start losing money. So not only is it costing me more, but we're also ineffective, right? So that's a scary place to be. And so when I see a team, I love this is my favorite analogy. So you have Batman, okay? Batman has Robin, okay? If Batman has Robin and Catwoman, and then he has that butler guy at the back thing, you're laughing. You're like a quad of excellence. And so, who's your wingman? And every good company has a wicked wingman that just is able to finish your sentences, dot I's, cross T's, and it's lovely and you don't feel alone. And so, to some degree, in some of the businesses, we are the wingman. And but you need a Batman and you need a Robin and you need a Catwoman. And ideally you need all four. And now you've got this super stable structure. And so if you want to grow your business, you better get that down. And somebody who's there through thick and thin, because once you grow, it doesn't get easier.
What in a case of a hardscape company or landscape company, what kind of roles are those wingmen and women in the company? Is that like you've got the owner and then you got the head of operations and then you've got like sales design. What do you see as those roles for each of those sort of wingmen, wing women in the business?
Yeah. So I'll kind of break it down. So you got the five pillars of business. So you've got economics, which is money, insurance, law, accounting, right? And the best companies typically it's a woman, a wife who's really good with numbers, and she's handling the back end finance. Okay, so you just don't have to worry about invoicing, collecting money, payables, cash flow. It's dialed in. So those companies generally do way better, right? Then there's the operations side, right? So that's the estimating, the scheduling, the logistics, the equipment, all that stuff, right? Then there's the sales and marketing, which is also design. It's all tied in there, right? And so you need a whole bunch of different skill sets. But now let's add to that technology. Now you need somebody who's actually good with technology, who can implement technology, integrate technology, automate technology, fix the technology when it fails. So that's another skill set. So when I'm looking for a company that's going to be on the opportunity side, they have a really nice mix of those skill sets, either in one individual or two individuals. And so if I had my druthers, I'd have a financial person who could sell and a sales and operation person. I'd have those two pieces. Then I'd have pretty much most things covered. And the technology I could outsource. Yes, I would pay a premium, but I don't actually need that in the house. When we go into business and we set up systems, because part of our consulting is actually setting up systems. We have one of my partners is a mechanical engineer, and he is a software systems guy. And so he used to work for banks implementing these insane systems for like 10, $12 million, just putting in technology with teams. So, you can outsource that. Like there's lots of great, I think, IT people out there, fortunately, in the industry when you need help. I mean, I haven't found somebody who's lacking on that front. I don't know why, but to have one in-house is even better. If you could have somebody with that skill set, wow.
When you say a company that has opportunity as one of those categories, what's like a typical opportunity that you see that they can capitalize on? Is this like a service they can bring on, or what is that?
No, so what an opportunity company is that they have very good cash flow. It's predictable sales pipeline. They don't have any threats in terms of labor, so their labor is solid. And oftentimes you'll find a family business, there's a brother and a sister or whatever, some sort of, blood bond there that is pretty hard to break. So the person's not quitting anytime soon. And so they have a great network, they have a great work ethic, right? And so that's an opportunity company. A distressed company is something's not right somewhere. Either it could be leadership issue, poor leadership, could be HR issues, could be operations issues where their equipment sucks and things are breaking down, they're fixing things, and it could be financial issues. Their books are just upside down. They're not, everything's just a disaster. Their accountant sucks. There's lots of different distresses. It could be one type of distress or a combination of distresses. And then the question is, what's that company's wherewithal to get through that financially and emotionally? So, a distressed company could also be a company that's been around for a long time and is large and is just burning money, wasting money all over the place. And in that case, you got to go in there with an axe and start chopping and cutting. And that means firing people. So that's another type of distressed company where we call that restructuring, right? Those are no fun to do, and necessary. And you can see, like, I went into one company in Europe and I cut $1 million out of their expense structure in 2 weeks, right? So that company's going to do a little bit better. It's a little less top heavy. And so, one of the other things also is like this company, even before I looked at the financials, just to give you an idea, is a manufacturing company in Europe. And I walk into the parking lot and I'm looking at the cars in the parking lot. I'm like, interesting. That's a nice Audi. That's a nice BMW. That's a nice Mercedes. Whose cars are those? Oh, that's my VP of this, my that. I'm like, and are those company cars? Yes, as a matter of fact, they are. So already red flag. Okay, so that's great. So then I go on the factory floor and then I go upstairs in the office section above the factory and I see a 2-to-1 ratio of admin to production. I'm like, that's not right. Something's wrong here. I don't know what these people do. So I already knew anecdotally something's not right before I even looked at the financials. And then we started looking at their processes. I'm like, well, you could do this in one step instead of 10 steps, and you could cut out, thousands of hours of expenses and payroll for doing this tasks that are a waste of time. So the best example I give you at Oriole Landscaping, when we started to grow, uh, we became the company, the benchmark for people to test their pricing on. So people say, can you give us a price on this? So we ended up being so busy pricing work and our closing ratios didn't improve. So we had to figure out how to go, okay, how do we not get used for pricing as the benchmark, right? And some estimates are 100 hours, like some of these giant jobs that we do. Some of them are 100, 150 hours of estimating. No word of a lie. Like there are books you've got to go through with specs and details and all these custom things. And we're like, this is insane. This is absolute insanity. And so, figuring out how to do all that stuff is the magic. And, fortunately, I also, beyond my consulting of the 100 customers, I used to do workshops for a landscape management network. So I used to teach them all over North America. So I'd see 20 or 30 companies at one time and see, I've seen 1,000 financials. And then I also built my company from scratch with my team and my partner. And I did every single role. So I understand every single role. I screwed up at every single level. And so you really start to see the patterns. It's really about patterns. You start to see the patterns. You also see the leadership patterns. The leaders make all the difference. So,
Going off of distress companies, and maybe this leads into the next question here. I don't know, but have you had any difficult clients in your consulting business?
yeah, yeah, I had a few.
So
So
they exist in
one,
every industry.
so I'm learning though, right? I'm learning. One, I was on a podcast talking about equipment. The guy liked what I said and he wanted to hire me. So I said it's, 2 days and it's going to be $10,000, and he couldn't afford the $10,000. So I said, okay, we'll do a day, and I'll spend extra time on it, and I'll just like I'll beat the crap out of your financials.
This
So I
wasn't
looked.
me, by the way, anyone
No,
listening,
no, this was
because our
not you.
last
No,
episode was about
no,
equipment.
that's right. So I went through his financials and I started looking at his ratios. So I was looking at ratios. I'm like, dude, your equipment ratio is like 50% of revenue. Like, do you even understand what that means in our industry? And I'm like, I've never seen numbers like this in my life. And so I'd insulted him. And I didn't mean to insult him. I'm just like, I'm the trauma surgeon, and you're coming into me and you're literally about to burst an aorta. And I tell you that you got to change your diet, and like all this stuff is bad. If you change this, you'll be fine. And then they don't want to change their diet, right? So I've got one day. to tell you that you're going to die. And by the way, I know, so I said, this person's going to quit. This is the, sure enough, everything I said was true. And the guy sent me this terrible email about how upset he was and how bad I was and this and that. And then 3 months later, I got an apology and everything I determined to be true because the numbers don't lie. And so that was a tough one. And I think what it was is I would, if I could do it again and I had more time, I would have loved to do a psychological profile on the guy because he was a feeling, perceiving type of person. And so he was more interested in his dream and his vision than he was in the financial aspect of his business. And so, if I would have had 2 days, I would have been far more gentle. But in one day, if I got to save your life, it's going to be brutal. I am going to amputate your leg. And I think I learned a lesson to be a little bit more gentle when I tell people the bad news. So that was one. I had another guy who who who's brilliant, like genius level guy. And his psychological profile was this literally the curious guy, just needs to learn more, wants to know more. And so the dilemma with him was he was more interested in learning than he was in making money. And I'd say, okay, well, so all these things are true. Do you agree? Yes, I do. Okay, cool. So what we need to do is we need to sign a document that commits us to taking this next step. Oh, I'm not ready. And this guy hired me 3 years in a row. So I think I got like 45,000 bucks out of the guy. He learned a hell of a lot. And he could never sign the document saying, I'm going to do this. That's hard because I already know that you've reached your Peter principle. So you're never going to get better. You're stuck because you just can't. And it's biological. Like no word of a lie. This guy's a genius. He probably should be a professor. He just shouldn't be running a business. You know,
Definitely.
like
Uh,
smarter than me, like way smarter than me. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's hilarious.
yeah. I'd be fascinated to see all the different personalities that you run into, especially those willing to spend the money on consulting and then, like you said, not even take action on it after the fact, and see all the different personalities that are uh, coming in as needing consulting, and then what they do with the advice afterwards. It'd be fascinating to see, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you do want to have wins. And so, most clients, almost all of them hire me back 2 to 5 times because I do what's called project-based consulting. So you got a problem, I'll fix the problem. I don't want to do any more, any less. And you've heard about the 10 types of waste. I don't know if you talked about it on any of your podcasts, but one of them is overspending. So like you can't do 10 things at once. So spend on one thing or two things, solve it, and then get it settled out, and then go and do something else and solve it and solve it and solve it. Circle back, dial in a bit. I saw one company, this was crazy. They hired me, they hired a financial firm, and they hired a marketing firm all at one time. What a disaster. Talk about overspending. And they couldn't implement all the things at the same time. And so I knew they were overspending on the financials and I knew they were overspending the marketing because it wasn't like they're going to double their revenue as a function of doing this. So that money that year was a loss the next year because they spent too much money too fast.
Okay, so coming into somebody hires you on for consulting and you do it in person, what's the very first thing that you look for when you start to analyze that company?
Yeah, so I always like to look at the operations first to see whether they have something they don't need, whether something's too old and crappy, and I try to turn assets that are underperforming into money, and that frees up the cash flow. So that's the first thing I typically do. Then what I do is I look at people. So I'll look at any liabilities. So I look at people as assets or liabilities on the balance sheet. There's no in between. And so essentially what we have an exercise where we can actually list the employees, you grade them A, B, C, or D, and then you have to decide whether you want them on the boat or not in the long run. And if not, then it's a question of when you're going to get rid of them. And so it's really hard to go to work with people that are, you know, not into it. And um, and that's those are the first two things that I typically do immediately. Then I start looking at flawed processes, flawed systems, things like that. So there are things that you can do that can save you money. There are things that you can do that can save you time, which will allow you to make more money. There are things that are going to save you time and money, right? And so sometimes I usually it's like multiple choice. I like to go over the easiest things first and get little wins, and then I start to go after the more complicated things. So easy wins first. It's just like doing a multiple choice test.
Hey, are you planning to attend HNA Hardscape North America October 22nd to the 24th in Louisville, Kentucky? Well, you can use our promo code VIPHTH to get 50% off your tickets, or you can click the link in the show notes below to register for this. I've gone the past 2 years. It is awesome. A massive trade show along with the Equip Exposition with more than 1,000 exhibits, 42,000 square feet hardscape house, as well as a 30 plus acre outdoor demo yard that you can demo equipment. There's the HNA awards ceremony. There's lots of educational sessions throughout the day, and there's more than enough events before and after the trade show itself. I've always enjoyed my time. I'll see you there. Use the code VIP HTH to get 50% off your tickets and register sooner rather than later, because tickets do increase leading up to the show. We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Knowledge Tree Consulting. They are efficiency consultants in the industry with 35 plus years of industry experience building Oriole landscaping in Toronto, which they are completely hands off at this point. George and Peter have been on the podcast before, and George, on multiple occasions now, I've personally leaned on him to help with the How to Hardscape headquarters software and how we can maximize the efficiency of user experience. And I know the guys at DTE Landscaping, Chuck and Jeffrey, who we've also had on the show multiple times, have hired them on in the past. Check out their consulting services, peer groups, and events that are coming up on their website, knowledgetreeconsulting.com, or check them out on Instagram at joinktc. Now back to our episode. How important is it to understand the numbers? And if somebody came to you and wanted consulting, but they didn't want to provide their numbers, can you still make decisions in the business without having those numbers?
Yeah, you can. So I'll give you an example. I'm doing business here in the U.S. Right now, I'm at their place, and no names, but the company is a fairly large company and very profitable. Their numbers are all over the place, and there's like process problems. So things aren't running smooth, but they're making money. And I literally couldn't figure out what's going on in the company because the numbers are all over the place. The chart of accounts are all over the place. So the analogy would be, how long are your legs? And it turns out that your arm is coming out of your leg. Well, it's not even a leg, so how do I measure it? What is that? It's like a hybrid leg arm. I don't know what it is. And so, you you want to put the financials together so that you can understand what it is that you're looking at. I'm looking at a male with blue eyes, 6'2", wide shoulders, big calves, blonde hair, whatever it is that I'm looking at, and I can understand it. So oftentimes we can't, people want to know their numbers. Well, how do you know their numbers if your books are upside down? Like to the point where there's a chart of accounts, and the way it works is you have 1,000, which is essentially assets. 2,000 is liabilities. 3,000 is equity. That's called your balance sheet. Assets minus liabilities equals equity. That's your net worth. Okay. And then the other part is your income statement, which is sales minus COGS, cost of goods sold, which is labor, equipment, materials, or subs, or in some cases, people take the equipment and shove it in overhead. Fine. And then you have your overhead expenses, which is what the customer doesn't see, right? And that's broken down into really simple. It's broken down to labor, wages for the overhead staff. It's broken down into conceivably equipment that would be in there. And then you have what's called ethos, economics, technology, human resources, operations, sales and marketing. And then you have depreciation, amortization. That's it. And that's your operating profit. And then there's a bunch of things that go below the line that I won't get into that. But that's essentially your, 4,000 is sales, 5,000 is COGS, 6,000 expenses. Then you end up with your operating profit. Pretty simple. And then from those numbers, you start to derive your pricing strategy. What do I need to charge to achieve these goals based on the number of hours I'm selling? What do I need to pay people to achieve those goals? So that's called budgeting. So that's the next big part of it. So then we start to help companies really get better at understanding how to budget and how to use their numbers to make money and make smart decisions. Then when in more complicated situations, like for this one company, I created a debt table. They have I would say tens of millions of dollars worth of assets. And I want to know how much interest you're paying on all the assets, whether it's a lease, whether it's a finance, whether it's a property, how much total interest. Because I believe that I can get that company to be debt free in 2 years, and that money goes straight to profit. It goes not to operating profit, but to other profit after it's the easiest money you'll ever make. So why should we take on more debt when we can grow without any debt? So those are the kind of things that we started looking at, um, and it's just incredibly empowering. So this company is going to start to get richer a hell of a lot faster, um, which is kind of cool.
Where do you prefer to see the equipment in cost of goods or as an overhead expense personally?
So cost of goods for the stuff that's producing, and the reason is I like to see the gross profit as a function of the ratio between labor and equipment. So theoretically, if I had more equipment, I would have less labor and I would make a higher gross profit. Or ideally, like our company, Oriole, we have a 7% equipment ratio in our COGS, right? Like it's crazy low. And so the reason is that we buy the best equipment, we sell it at the right time, we have almost no maintenance, no downtime, and we just buy and sell well. And we also have low fuel costs because we're close to where we work, right? So, I'm looking at those ratios and I can tell you, this is crazy, or maybe you should set up your fleet rotation schedule this way so that you can make money on gain on sale of assets. So there's all this money that people don't even see that they're throwing away. And I talked about that in the equipment session last time. So you want to create a fleet rotation schedule, understand the why in your market and the type of equipment that you're buying, when to sell it, and what to buy, and to understand that don't look at the price, look at the value. So we go through all that when we do the consulting.
You did mention the first thing when you are analyzing a company, understanding the operations. Why is that so important? Why is that number one or one of the first things that you look at when you analyze a company?
Sure. So, okay, you're doing $1 million and you have 6 trucks, and we do 1.2 million with one truck. Why is that? My trucks are new, your trucks are old. Your repairs are huge, mine aren't, right? Like, how does that work? So that's operations. How to do the stuff, how to get people and materials to the job site on schedule, on time, and get it done in the right amount of time. So like, how do we do that? And so I look at costs. If I look at the number of trucks you have per person, like those are all interesting numbers. And how many used trucks do you have? Why are you buying used? If used was such a great idea, why don't the big companies buy all used? And so, or yeah, and then we can do a scenario, a test scenario. If you did this, this is what would happen. You're going to make more money. Your balance sheet's going to be a lot stronger. Your repairs are going to be way lower, right? Your employees aren't going to quit because they're driving the truck with no air conditioning. So the operations is the first place to free up money very easily, Or I've gone into companies that have they have 4 crews and 7 trailers. Like, I don't understand that. We have 10 crews and one trailer, like,
Since you've grown Oriole, I'm sure it's very easy for you to come in and see the number of trucks and the number of employees and
oh
be
yeah.
like, "Oh, this is off," like almost immediately.
Yeah. So if I walk into a company, I'm like, what's that? How often do you use it? Why do you need it? Well, I got a deal on it. It was a deal, or was it really? Okay, well, you could have paid off this interest and saved that money and not had this thing depreciate. And you'd have the cash. So you'd have the cash, you'd save the depreciation, and you would have paid less interest and you would have made more money. So how does that make sense? Yeah, but I use it twice a year. It's like, well, you could have rented for $500 and you still would have been further ahead by like $4,000 or five. And then you do that 10 times and $40,000. And then you take the time cost of money. You say, okay, well, what's that over 10 years? Holy crap. That's like $400,000. If you take that, it's unbelievable how compound interest works. It's a crazy curve. And people just see what's in front of them and they love their toys. So that's the first thing I do is I get people to be dispassionate about their stuff. It's just stuff.
When should a company grow and when should a company optimize?
Great question. So optimize first and then grow. never grow and optimize at the same time. You can tweak, that's different, tweaking things. So let's say you were buying a company. Okay, so we just bought a company 2 years ago at Oriole. And the reason we were ready to buy the company is we had the administration in place to handle it. And plus, the company we hired also had pretty good administration. So it wasn't like, I'll give you an example. There's a company that I'm coaching, and they have an opportunity to buy a company for, I think, and the irony is some of these companies I'm talking about, you've actually interviewed. So, they have a company that wants to sell the company for $800,000 and the assets are worth 100,000. Okay. So whatever, it's cheap. Um, and the question is, should they buy the company? And the answer is no, not at that price. And the reason is company's incredibly profitable and the owners are paid incredibly well. But as soon as the owners leave, there's no management. So unless you have a seasoned management team that's not at capacity that can take that work on, you're going to have nightmares. I don't care how well the production is. So the company is either way overvalued, right? Because you're not getting the management. Now, if it was the owners and they had managers and I get the managers, okay. Now it's worth way more because the company's worth way less if it's built all around the owners. It doesn't matter how much money you make or how profitable they are. It doesn't matter how well run they are. As soon as the management's gone, you got to replace that management. Good luck with that. And most people don't just have managers lying around ready to take on, a couple $1 million worth of work. So you can get yourself into trouble with the idea of growing. It's like this, like, I'm going to get married. It's a nice idea. It's just a lot of work to be married. It's like, no way.
uh, well, I've already held you up so long here already, George, but we'll pound through a couple more questions and then we'll get to our challenge here. But speaking of challenge, what's the biggest challenge that companies face that you have consulted with or just seen from the outside?
Two things. It either is people problems or a lack of sales for whatever reason. Those are the two the biggest deadly sins. Those are killers. You know, that is like your right-hand man left or woman left. And that can be overwhelming.
So talking about people, when should somebody let people go? So maybe it's the opposite of not having enough people and
Yesterday. Yesterday.
so what's the decision behind actually letting somebody go? And especially in your consultation business, when has that been apparent to you that this person needs to go?
They're negative. They don't add value. They don't work hard. They don't put the extra time in required. They complain. They make excuses. They're low conscientiousness. Like they just don't have. I like people who are like, I want this done right, and I'm here for you, and I care about you, and we want to do a good job and want to work hard, and we take pride in what we do. That's not common, by the way. So it's when you're building a company, you're essentially putting together pieces of amazing people because that's the ingredients, that's the DNA of a company. Is beautiful people, and that's the magic. The companies that are magical have just amazing people.
And speaking of people, one of the first episodes that I had George on the podcast talked specifically about people. So I'll link that in the show notes as well as our past episodes. George, let's challenge some people. What is this consulting challenge and why is it going to be so important here?
Okay. So ironically, people start their businesses and becoming an entrepreneur is probably the biggest risk you can take. You give up your steady job and you go into this world of entrepreneurship. And you know, people then stop willing or are not willing to take risks. And they're not even like irrational risks. They're like rational risks. If I did, this could be huge, and they still don't do it. So here's my challenge. I want to do three companies. I want to do a company under 1 million. I want to do a company under 5 million and say company under 20 million. And the deal is that I will fly out, I will pay for my hotel, I will pay for my travel. Okay. And I'm going to tell you what I cost. And there's two possibilities that can happen. You will choose to take the challenge and hire me. And if you're not happy, don't pay me. Okay. If you're not happy, don't pay me. Not a cent. I'll never mention your name. No problem. And if I'm worth my money, you'll pay me. So who wouldn't take that risk? And my test to your audience, you've got all these people, you got over 1,000 people. I don't even know how many, 2,000 people now looking at your podcast. Here's a challenge to you that I'm willing to go out there and put myself on the line and risk whether or not I can change your life.
That's a great challenge. And just to mention, George, you will do Canada, the States, wherever
Yeah,
North America there.
Europe. Yeah, I've got my E1 visa. I can work in the US. I've got my European citizenship and I've got my Canadian citizenship. And I'm, my kids are out of the house. And so at this point it's fun for me. So like here's my downside. Well, look at this. So what is George's downside? George goes out there. I've yet to meet somebody that's mean. So I haven't met a mean person. So okay, they could be mean. So I go out there and I spend 3 days. It costs me, I don't know, $3,000 and I get nothing. So what? I can afford that. And if I'm not lucky, because I know I'm actually pretty good at what I do, I'm 100% confident I'm going to get paid. And I know I'm going to change someone's life. And so here's the thing, that if I do this and it works out, then I will, on your podcast, tell everybody my wins and losses. So you want to see transparent metrics. How's George doing on the challenge? How happy are the customers? And if I'm really that good, then anybody in their right mind would want to hire me. Right?
Yep.
And if I'm failing, I'll never be on another podcast again. Whatever it is.
That's a great challenge to put out there. I'm excited to see if somebody or three people from our audience is going to take you up on that and to hear what the results are from this. But excellent challenge, George. If you want to reach out to George for this, where can they reach out to you to get this started?
So on our website, Knowledge Tree Consulting, or you can email me at george@ktc.biz, B-I-Z. It's an easy one. And also what I'm going to do is, as part of my deal with Mike in terms of sponsoring his event, we're going to be promoting my consulting challenge. And if it turns out that it's working, which will be a really interesting marketing ploy, I'm going to be very busy. I'm already very busy. I just want to see what this does. I want to see how brave your audience is to take a risk with no risk. This is literally a risk with no risk.
I'll put those links in the show notes if you want to reach out to George there, and we'll be sharing it on Instagram as well. George, thank you once again for giving back to the audience as well here. This is probably the fifth or sixth time that we've had you on and taken up an hour of your time each time. So George, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
So there it is. If you want to take up George on his offer there, go to knowledgetreeconsulting.com. Get that conversation started with them to see if you are willing to take him up on his offer. And I'd actually be really interested. If you are interested, shoot me a message at How to Hardscape and I can introduce you to the team at Knowledge Tree Consulting there. Or if you're curious and want to ask a few questions, I sat down with George and did a full day consult with him and went through their process. It is a lot to take in at once, and it is really awesome what they have developed there. So I recommend it. And if you want to ask me some questions, send me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram. And we're looking for reviews, ratings, Spotify, Apple, or just letting people know about this podcast. Other hardscapers that you know, send them a link, share it to your stories on Instagram, whatever you do, I would really appreciate that. And before we leave you, want to say thank you to our sponsors. Cycle CPA, if you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. PatioSEO.com. And now you know Patio SEO can take your hardscape business to the next level. James Reed and his expert team have built a reputation on success, not just for their own companies, but for hundreds of others just like yours. So don't wait. Visit PatioSEO.com to learn more and get started. But also be sure to follow James's journey on Instagram at Road to 100 M's. That's Road to 100 MS for behind the scenes tips and insights. And I do recommend checking that out and following along to that. Ready to build your brand? Patio SEO is here to help you every step of the way. If you're planning to go to Hardscape North America in Louisville, Kentucky, October 22nd to the 24th. You can use promo code VIPHTH to sign up, get 50% off your registration. That also gives us a little bit of a kickback and helps us here at the How to Hardscape podcast. And Knowledge Tree Consulting. George and Peter there are efficiency consultants in our industry, and I've had the privilege of having them both on one episode of the How to Hardscape podcast, and George multiple other times. Always great episodes, and I also got to sit down on a one-on-one with George and went through what they do for businesses, and I left that meeting with a lot of value, so I can't recommend them enough. If you want to learn more about what they do, go to knowledgetreeconsulting.com and get that conversation started with them today. And we look forward to meeting you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.